Hey guys, I'm Sai and welcome to A.C.E Podcast Nation, and this is Series 2 of our revamped and new look mental health in sports series. In this series we're focusing specifically on footballers. We'll be talking to current and ex-footballers about difficulties that they've suffered with mental health, addiction and similar subjects. In the current climate of the world, I feel like talking about mental health issues is more important than ever as this ever-changing world that we live in is going. These shows are going to be open and an honest account of some of the issues faced by these athletes at the height of their career and after. So we look forward to hearing their stories. A.C.E Podcast Nation, we're home to many great shows and guests featuring exclusive interviews, top guests, expert analysts and more. So follow for video versions at youtube.com/A.C.E Podcast Nation and the audio version at all the usual places for podcasts and radio platforms. The links for which are in below. Okay, with no further ado, joining me for each episode is someone who's appeared on the channel a few times before. He's back again to help us talk to the guests and spread awareness for mental health. I'm very happy to welcome my co-host, mental health support worker Jacob, back to the channel. Welcome, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
I'm alright, buddy. Alright. I'm gonna just move that, sorry, because I was looking like I was about 4 foot tall. So our guest for today's episode is former Wales international, ex-Swansea, Bristol City, Wigan Athletic and current Barry Town winger, Mr. David Cotterill. How are you, David?
I'm very well. How are you guys?
All good, mate. Welcome back. Obviously, you were on the Andy Campbell show recently where we had a good talk about the football side of your career. And I know you've talking a lot about mental health since you've sort of... you haven't retired because you're still playing for Barry, obviously, but since you've sort of winding down your career, should we say, including starting up the David Cotterill Foundation, which obviously helps people with issues and things like this. We'll most definitely get into that towards the end of the show. But first of all, what I want to do is, for people who are maybe not familiar with you, is kind of give them just a quick background in your own words about you, your upbringing, and your kind of career.
How long do you want it to be? Because I could be here all day, by the way.
Yeah, no, just a general thing of you and your upbringing and where you go.
Yeah, so my upbringing was fine. I was I brought up on a council estate. I started playing football from a very young age, from the age of 6. I first got picked up by Bristol City when I was 10 years of age, so I was pretty much into a professional environment from a very young age, and seeing your friends, or if you like teammates at a young age, getting shown rejection, you're fighting for contracts, you're fighting for places from, such a young age. And as I mentioned before, adult life, we don't like rejection, etc. So you can imagine the environment that creates with the younger kids. And so, from probably around about my teenage years, I dealt with a lot of mental health problems, which I didn't discuss about until probably 2 years ago when I was 30. And I made my first professional debut when I was 16 for Bristol City. Then I made my professional debut, my international debut for Wales at the age of 17. So quite quickly from a young age, a lot of things were happening. And so yeah, that's a little bit of my background. Do you want me to go into any more detail?
No, that's okay for now. I mean, as a professional, you mentioned there as a kid about rejection. Obviously, as a professional athlete, particularly a footballer, there's so many ups and downs. Like one week you can be a hero, the next week you're a villain. It's got to be difficult to deal with as an adult, particularly with social media and this type of thing, and the media generally. They love to be negative, particularly about footballers and young footballers who are doing well. They love to drag them down. This creates an incredible amount of pressure for young players, young athletes. Just before I go to that with you, David, Jacob, obviously you work with footballers and football clubs. What sort of things are these players dealing with, like from a pressure point of view, and the highs and lows?
Well, I think from when David started his career compared to sort of the young players, even now you're noticing some clubs are on top of, look, let's talk about mental health, let's talk about social media, all that stuff. Back when David was in, I imagine they did nothing at Bristol City about mental health or social media or anything like that. So I think the pressure compared is massive. You know, I spoke to a youth player at Bristol Rovers and said, you know, how long have you been in the youth setup? He was like 8 years old, and he was 16. I said, well, what happens if you don't make it to get your first pro contract? He was like, it's a bit shit, really. Like I've done all this work and it's basically back to square one, but I'm like sort of 7 years behind all my friends. And I think that sort of non-preparing these youth players is still a problem in the game. And I think definitely sort of you're noticing now sort of David's era of footballers, they're sort of, there's nothing there, I suppose, for when the players are coming out into retirement. You can see from early stages, the same, you know, James Coppinger has talked about his early career. He was sort of thrust into sort of the limelight, same as David was in the national squad. And there's no support then. We're seeing it now through people like David sharing their experiences. It's helping the youth players. But if it wasn't for sort of these pros coming out and sharing their stories, where would we be? Because I don't think there's enough support out there, especially for youth players. If it wasn't for these amazing pros coming out and sharing their experiences, because it's just not there, really.
Yeah, I spoke to a sports psychologist on one of my really early shows. It was technically series 1 of this series, Mental Health and Sport, and she said her job was specifically to deal with 16, 17, 8-year-old boys who've been in the youth academy systems since they were very young, and then all of a sudden at 17 they're told, oh, we don't want you anymore, you know, you haven't got a career, and they've put so much into their football that that's all they're going to be. They kind of have suffered in school, they haven't really done that well in their GCSEs, and they've got just this feeling of doom as if their life is over. Now obviously us as adults know that, you know, you can resit your GCSEs and you can go and do this and that, but like even when I was in school, it was told to you like the GCSEs, they were the end of the world. If you failed them, that was it, you were done, you were never ever going to get a job, you were never going to succeed. And you know, I'm sure it's a bit different now, but for a boy who's been in an academy system all his childhood and then be told he's not good enough, that's very difficult. Okay, so David, with this series, what we want to do is we're getting obviously different guests, current and past footballers, and we're basically just asking them to tell their story in their own words, kind of bit by bit, and then me and Jacob will kind of ask questions along the way. So you mentioned you had some sort of mental health problems in your teenage years. Was that purely like a kind of like mental health thing, or was that with, obviously you've talked about your issues with alcohol later in your career, was those early issues that you mentioned there more of like the mental health side than the drinking?
Yeah, it was just purely mental health. I didn't used to, well, from a young age, as I say, from the age of 6, you know, if I wasn't having a football at my feet, my dad would tell me, well, why are you not practicing? Why are you not doing this? And so from a very young age, even from like the age of 10, I wasn't able to go, you know, down the park and be with my mates. Or when I'm 12, 13, they would go and have a drink. And like most teenagers, they get into a little bit of trouble or whatever it was. Whereas I didn't have that. I didn't really have, I wouldn't say that I had much of a childhood past the age of 10 and 11, because my main focus was purely on being a professional footballer. And I think Jacob just mentioned earlier on there where, you know, there's no education and you should have maybe a plan B. But for me, I didn't want a plan B because I knew I was going to succeed as a footballer, and I didn't want the plan B because that was all my focus was. So I purely put my determination and my focus all into that. I do believe there should be education along the way now, and there should have been back then as well. It just, unfortunately, it wasn't. And I still feel that we're still playing a lot of catch up now, because I think I put like a little random thing on my Instagram the other day. I had a meeting with my foundation. We're thinking about what can we do or whatever, and I posted something on my story, and I said, in your workplaces, who's been getting mental health support, or of their bosses asked how they're doing to do with mental health since COVID has kicked in. And 83% of the people, I've got like 39,000 followers on Instagram. So out of the people who viewed that and the ones who voted, there's 83% said that they haven't had support.
That's incredible.
So, and but and
Scary, isn't it?
a lot of footballers have answered and put their thoughts on that as well. But not just in football, but most industries, they all like doing tick box exercise with, oh yeah, we're supporting mental health, but they're not really. They're like all these commercial things that they post on social media and they do this and do that where they support their players. They're not doing fuck all. So I'm not having it one bit. They like to perceive that they're doing something, but they're not really.
Yeah,
But going back to my story,
yeah.
it's all about me today. No, so yeah, with probably from an early age, I was always searching for perfection, and so I think that's where the troubles were. That's where the troubles related to even up to like, probably like 2-3 years ago. I was always searching for perfection.
Did that sort of, obviously that determination which you mentioned about not really wanting a plan B is obviously that's part of the reason you were able to succeed and become a professional footballer and play international football, because you need that you need that determination, you need that focus. But do you think that sort of striving for perfection, sorry I couldn't get my words out, from such a young age where you're competing against other boys, you want to get signed by the club, you want to play in the first team, etc. Do you think that that need to constantly be almost perfect, that puts pressure on your mental health straight away, because you're always kind of, it's like a hyper focus on being the best all the time? That must put like a bit of a strain on things like anxiety and depression and things. If especially if you have a bad game, or things don't feel right in training for a week or two, and you're at that young age, you're not mentally mature enough to deal with that sort of the pressure to be. I keep using the word perfect, but that's what footballers and young footballers, that's what they're striving for. That's got to be very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, it is. I think, well, from like an early age, with, as I say, if I look at the generation that's coming through now, and I've got a teenage son, I sometimes have the discussions, and he had the ideas of being a footballer without putting the work in. He never used to practice. I think he just liked the idea of, oh well, footballers got nice cars, they got this, they got that, but it takes a lot of effort to become that successful. That even to play at League Two, League One level, it takes a lot of determination and a lot of sacrifices to get there. And I think from the times that I look at him, from the pressures that I had as a child is completely different. Whereas the pressures that I put on him is literally that, well, I want you to be respectful, you need to be home on time, or you need to do certain things. Whereas mine was purely, if you don't practice, you're not going to. Well, I didn't go out with my mates. Very rarely did I go out with my mates. I was always practicing for hours. If not, I was traveling from Cardiff to Bristol to train.
Yeah, you make me feel guilty because that's what I do to my son. But from my point of view, like just very quickly with him, is I'm like, he's in like an academy system, and he's at 15 now, so he's getting to that age where it's going to be either they want you or they don't. So I'm trying to instill on him that he needs to practice, he needs to train, and you've got to, if you want to do this, you've got to sacrifice going out with your mates, because otherwise you can't do both. And at the moment it's going smoothly, but we'll see. But like you say, it's about you today, David. So looking back with hindsight, when do you think your issues sort of progressed to a point where they were a problem? Or actually, no, sorry. Looking back with hindsight, when did your issues with sort of drinking and that sort of thing start?
Well, going back to, just before that, like when I was 13, 14, I knew I had like anger problems where I was always like, I would self-harm, where I'd smash my studs against my shins, because I thought, well, I could always cover that up, because I was training 3 or 4 times a week, and I was playing games. It's normal for players to have scars on their shins because they're always into tackles. So I thought I could get away with it and no one would question me. So if things didn't go right, I just smashed my boots against my shins for a little bit. And so I always had that anger problems where I didn't rectify those problems or situations. And so that materialized later on. But I think my drinking, I started drinking and going out a little bit more when I was 19, but I would say it was probably a lot more in full flow when I was at maybe Doncaster when I was about 23, 24.
Okay. So
Do you think? Do you think
Dirty.
your drink was a form of like self-medication for like your struggles with mental health?
Well, I was going through I had a relationship that I didn't want to be in at that time. I was going through a divorce, and the thing is that when you go through a divorce in normal working society, you feel like you have support. But having a divorce and then you go in to play games and you got then fans, if you're having a bad game, they're abusing you, and then you go and then you're on social media, then they're abusing you, then this and all that. So you're having to you're going to work having shit. You're then going home to shit because you don't want to be with that person. You're going through a divorce, and then when there's children involved, then you're not allowed to see your children. You're traveling up and down the motorway because your ex is stopping you from seeing your kids, and blah blah blah, and you have to deal with all that bollocks. Then to go in to perform at a high level to get your team promoted, and obviously because that's a big goal of obviously the team and yourself, and blah blah blah. So you're having to maintain the levels of consistency with your profession, but then having to deal with not seeing your kids. So it is very difficult, and I don't think a lot of people take that into consideration. They kind of feel that footballers are robots, nothing affects them, they're above the law, they've got all this X amount of money, and they don't have no feelings.
Yeah, like speaking as a father, I know, well, we're all fathers, and also knowing I've got a couple of close friends who are not able to see their children at the moment, and it's absolutely destroying them. And obviously, with the way the world is now, they're very isolated because of COVID and things like this. But when you add that to, like you said, the pressure of having to perform, but not just perform in your job, it's performing in professional sport where you've got thousands of fans screaming at you, telling you how they can do it better, basically telling you you're rubbish, telling you you're not trying, and all this different stuff that footballers have to put up with on a weekly basis. That's got to be difficult, and there's got to be a release to get away from that. And like your situation, you said you're having the problems you're having at home. You were drinking. You were also then having a lot of shit from fans. Social media is just a cesspool, as we all know, of just faceless people saying whatever they want. So at that point, were you kind of just drinking because of all that, or was it more like I mean in the moment rather than looking back in hindsight? Was it more of like, oh, I'm just going to go out and have a few beers because of everything, I just want to get away from it and have a few beers? Or was at that point, were you kind of like you just wanted to drink to get through it and forget?
It was probably a bit of both. At first it started off, well, I'm now single, where I was in a relationship from a very early age, and I had children very young, so I didn't really have experience that kind of single life as a young footballer coming through and doing what they needed to do to, the usual antics of going out, seeing girls, whatever it might be. So kind of like I was a delayed kind of like 6-7 years with that.
Yeah.
So initially we were starting to go out, drink, girls, that sort of stuff. And then I felt amazing when I was drinking. Like most people, when people drink, they kind of like forget what they're thinking about, and they feel in a bubble where they feel indestructible for that time. And I was never one of these people that I could go out and have one or two drinks and go home. It was literally, right, I'm staying out till I'm absolutely steaming. And even then, I look back and it kind of I wouldn't say it's a perfection kind of trait, but I was just never happy with anything. There would be loads of times that I was speaking to my cousin actually about this the other day. He's like, you used to go out and you'd still not be happy if we went home about 5-6 a.m. in the morning. I'm like thinking, I was just never happy. I was never wanting the night to stop. I was always searching for more and more and more. So it's just like, it's kind of like the same thing, probably in the younger days of me looking for perfection, always searching for something better.
Yeah, and I guess like part of the contribution to that is that you didn't experience going out and doing all that stuff as a young footballer when you were 18, 19, 20, first breaking into the Welsh team and playing professional football. That is going to have a kind of impact on that because you didn't get to do those single life footballer things. It's part of growing up, isn't it? But you obviously at that time, rather than going through it at a young age and growing up and kind of doing it, you were doing it when you had a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on you from all angles, it sounds like. What was your career like going like at that point in terms of your form and and just generally?
Yeah, probably from from an early age of 16 to when I went to Wigan, everything was plain sailing. I was literally living the dream. I worked extremely hard. I made some huge sacrifices to be a professional footballer. Everything was good. My parents, were always supporting me, always there for me. Um, it was just, I think probably looking back from an early age, I had a little bit of resentment towards my dad. I think just because I couldn't, when he would always bang on about from like a young age of even like 8 and 9 years of age, you'd ask me questions I wouldn't even know. It's kind of like, well, why did you play shit today? And I'm like thinking, well, no one wakes up and walks out the door thinking, right, I'm just going to be a shit person today and make loads of mistakes. So I didn't really have the answers because no one could have the answers as an adult, really. And it was just always purely about that. So when I made as a professional footballer, I felt like a little bit of resentment thinking, do you know what? You can't say nothing to me now because you wanted to be a footballer and you didn't make it, but I have. So I'm the professional now, so you need to listen to me. So I kind of like had that mindset of that way. And it's probably a stupid mindset because, he put a lot of time and effort into me. When I wanted to practice, he would take me down the local field. He would take me out and just practice and work on my left foot shooting, my right foot shooting. So he put a lot of time into me, and he's my biggest critic, but probably my biggest fan as well. So it's kind of like, that's just the way it was. And you do need that. I'm not purely focusing on, the reason why I had mental health issues is because of that. I'm just saying the pressures from a young age is very difficult. And, I'm not blaming him for that, all of it. Of course I'm not. I need to take some blame on it as well. But when I did make as a pro, I didn't think that I had the right support. When I went to Wigan, it's kind of like the agency. My agent there, as I think I spoke to you about it last time, was Cyril Regis, and he was an amazing person. I had all the time in the world for him. He's a great guy, and I just felt like the agency group itself, that they had so many players and didn't really necessarily care about them as individuals. They were kind of like, we're all on a conveyor belt. So that's why I decided to leave that agency. There was good people at Wigan, but I didn't feel that I had the great support things. I don't think things were in place then really to support players with the mental health now they were feeling. It's kind of like, well, you need a house, we'll show you around houses, and that's it. So there's nothing from a standpoint of like how you're going to perform on the pitch, or how you, not on the pitch necessarily, but maybe how you're feeling off the pitch. So there's no support there that I felt personally. And then it went later on, and then when I was at and I moved around a bit. I had Kevin Blackwell at Sheffield United, which, if you're talking about mental health, he's probably the last person that I would never go and speak to someone like him anyway, because I just didn't like him. And then when I went to Doncaster, it's kind of like my drinking was in full flow, but we were pushing for promotion. I was scoring or assisting every week, so that kind of, I was playing really, really well. Made team of the year that year. We got promoted. So I kind of felt like indestructible. I'm thinking, well, I'm getting steaming almost every other night, and we're winning, and I'm scoring goals, and I'm performing. So why stop that formula, kind of thing? So I got back in the Welsh squad when I was out of the squad for a couple of years. So I was thinking, why should I change anything?
What was the moment? So in our sort of work, we talk about a stress bucket. So everyone has a stress bucket, and all these things. Imagine your bucket, and each bit of stress will fill that bucket up. And every bucket will have like a little tap at the bottom. If we open that tap, it relieves that stress. But sometimes if we don't relieve that tap by doing things like exercise, mindfulness, stuff like that, it will overflow. What was your moment? Was it at Doncaster where, maybe the troubles with sort of the divorce, the drinking? What was the moment where it all sort of tipped out and you thought, okay, we've got an issue here?
I think probably, the divorce. I dealt with the divorce and the issues of the shit of like trying to deal with my kids and just all that for many years. Even after the divorce, the toxic relationship still continues. That's where I do disagree with the law in the UK, whereas how is it okay for, I believe personally that more often than not, there's a high percentage that the women are allowed to use kids as more as like pawns in a game and use them. as a weapon against kind of like the guys where they're trying to just gain access. Where I think that causes a huge amount of mental health problems. So, yeah, I think probably the divorce. I was happy to have the divorce. I didn't want to be with her, but I just wanted to see my kids and have a normal relationship with my kids, which, um, it was just always one thing after another. It was just a pain in the ass for many years, and having to do that, and then obviously with football wise. But the thing with the football thing is that I love the pressure. I love the abuse during the game. When I used to take a corner and they were like, "Oh, look, you haven't got no hair. Your head is like a light bulb shining." Whatever they might have said, probably in a lot more stronger terms than what I've just said there. But I used to love all that because I'm thinking as soon as I score a goal, I'm coming straight over to you and giving it back to you.
Yeah. Funny enough, I was sat in a corner when you were warming up for Swansea versus Cardiff, and some of the stuff that the guys.
Come on, Si. What did you say to him?
I was with my missus. because I wasn't. I was a bit more mature by then, and I was.
What did she say to him?
But these two guys behind, some of the stuff they were saying, and like you were like 5 foot away from us, so you could hear everything, and I was just I was gobsmacked by some of the stuff they were saying. Like, I get that there's going to be a bit of abuse and stuff, but some of the stuff, it was like, wow. And one of them had their kid, like a little kid with them as well, and I was just like, Jesus. But to be fair to you, you just laughed. Because
Do you know what? I used to just laugh that off, but you know what? So it was quite mad. So when I played for Sheffield United against Cardiff, I used to take all the set pieces. So when I was at Sheffield United, I was like 19, 20. So I was even on penalty duty quite, straight away, really. So I stepped up, took a few penalties. Then we played against Cardiff at old Cardiff City Stadium, Ninian Park. And so I scored. So I obviously celebrated in front of our Sheffield United fans and with my teammates because we were pushing for promotion. We were a big club in that division and blah, blah, blah. And I literally had so much abuse off that. It was insane. And I remember I was thinking, well, what do they want me to do? Do they want me to miss a penalty then against my hometown club for me to then not play the next game and me sacrifice the food putting on the table for my kids for you just to go and cheer that you've won a game? Yeah. So I couldn't understand it. And after that game, I think I went away with Wales. I can't remember, but I was away from my wife and my child at the family, and my wife and my little one at the time. And, we were having threats of, people, we know where you live. We know that you're away on international duty. We know that your wife and kid are alone, blah, blah, blah. And I was like 19, 20 at that age.
That's got to be horrifying, mate.
And it's just madness. Obviously, you're thinking, well, at the time you're thinking, oh my God, the worst is going to happen. But, it's not really.
But when you're away, though, it must make it worse because you're not, it's one thing being at home and getting that type of threat and you kind of are able to kind of say like, oh yeah, it's just football fans sending shit, whatever.
Okay,
but when you're away, all you've got is sat in a hotel room, I'd imagine, just with your mind running away with itself, really, about different stuff. Like that's another type of pressure, which I think that type of pressure goes very under the radar in terms of what people think about pressures on athletes, particularly footballers. Is everyone knows when they're away from home, so they're going to be worried about their wives, their children, and how many times a year do we see about burglaries in footballers' houses where there's been armed robbers go in and steal everything or whatever. That's another added aspect of pressure. So obviously you got promoted with Doncaster. You were drinking a lot, but career-wise things were going pretty well. When did you get to a point where you think, shit, my drinking's getting a bit of a problem now?
I think at Doncaster I knew that I was out quite a lot, but because I was performing, I thought, do you know what, it's fine. And but I just felt like alone, really. Like when I felt anything, I was just always drinking, and then that would be like my self-medicating, where I was thinking, you know what, I'm just going to have a few drinks. Then it, as I mentioned before, it'd never just be 1 or 2 drinks. It would always end up me steaming and so on and blah, blah, blah. But I think probably, I always had that probably reputation throughout my career of being a little bit of a loose cannon, and he loves a night out. Amount of managers that used to say to me after I retired, saying, "Oh, we were looking at you to sign you, but you used to love a little cheeky night out, but now we know why, because obviously since your story. But so I'm thinking, and since I've retired, I've thought about this. I'm thinking, well, if you're a football club and you've got a guy who's coming in, more often than not, you can smell alcohol on them. When is the time that you intervene to say, well, we're going to help you?
Yeah.
But it was never that to intervene and help me from that perspective. It was always kind of like, right, you smell of alcohol today. You can stay inside and do a second day recovery to stay in the gym because we don't want the manager to smell alcohol on you. It was never kind of like, do you think we should get you some help or help you as a human? It was kind of like, right, still, we want to make sure that we hold our jobs to lick the manager.
Like sweep it under the rug almost.
Yeah, backside basically. Yeah, sweep it under the rug. And then, because that's the thing, in football, it's kind of like, it's always like, you know, the physios or the doctors, not necessarily the doctors because they're employed by the club, that's different anyway, but like the physios or the coaches, they're always kind of like stick with the manager because they're thinking, well, if we stick with the manager and he goes to a new job, we need to make sure we're, you know, tight with him. So from that perspective, it was kind of like, well, you know, I never really got help from my addiction side with my drinking. And it was, you know, it was a big issue for me, definitely at Birmingham. I think that's when it really, really got out of control because, you know, I was going home, I was smashing up things in my house on a regular basis. I remember this one time, it was my friend's 30th birthday, and I went out and we had training the next day, and I smashed my fist through a mirror, and literally my bone was popping out of my knuckle. And I woke up the next day, I thought, I'm just going to go to sleep. And then part of me was thinking, well, I hope I don't wake up because I don't want to be alive anyway. So it was like all these mad scenarios that were going through my mind. And so I woke up the next day, the bed sheets were completely covered. The bill I had for the cleaning up bill after that was quite big as well. So I thought, forget it, doesn't matter. I got to go training. So I went to training, and it was about 17, 18 degrees at that time as well. And I had to wear gloves. I put gloves on just to hide that I was, you know, the blood was still streaming and so on. And then I seen the physio after. I said, look, my hand, I didn't want to tell you before training because I didn't want you to think that I was out drinking, but I fell down the stairs. I didn't. I was out drinking. So I was just like, he said, why have you just trained with that? You should know that's dangerous or whatever it might have been and blah, 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 blah. So I then had to see the doctor to stitch it up after that. So they were kind of like the incidents that were just like more and more creeping in, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse.
Was that the first time you had lied about drinking, or had you lied about like drinking before that? I'm interested because
I always used to lie about it. I always used to lie about the drinking. If I used to go out and you go like most guys. Like, let's be honest, if most guys go to the local pub and their missus at home going absolutely berserk, and you said you're only going to go down. Oh yeah, honestly, I got chatting, babe. I only had 2 drinks, and then before you haven't. You've had about 8, and you're steaming, and you're just trying to stand there all just like straight. Like
hold the conversation. People lie about it.
I suppose that's the alcoholic. With most alcoholics, I know when they're in that madness of drinking all the time, they can be. You know, it's the hiding the beers, but also they can make these amazing, you know, oh no, it's because of this or because of that, or that's why, you know, and it's all these.
I always used to be able to, I could find a reason to go out, and why I'd stayed out all night. I was always able to come up with like a plausible excuse. So like, to me anyway, it was like there was a reason why I'd be gone out at 6 o'clock for a quick pint. Or what I used to do very often is I was working in child sports at the time, and I would get the train back, and I'd get off the train, and there was a pub right at the train station. I go, I'll have a beer while I wait for my lift, and then I'd come in like 6 o'clock in the morning the next day, get showered, and go to work. And quite often I would drink before work, and but I'd always have an excuse, always have a reason. But anyway.
I think it's the British culture. Like, we drink when someone gets married, we drink when someone has a baby, we drink when there's a funeral, we drink when someone gets a job. That's that normal culture. But I suppose when you put in that alcoholic or addictive nature into anyone, it ramps it up. And I suppose with you, it's that trying to hide when it was at its worst, because some bits from your coaches or from the team, so you can still get in and do the job. But did like sort of family members notice stuff?
Yeah, I think, a lot of, my dad would say, you're drinking a lot, and because my dad would normally drink, from a very early, I don't remember my dad not drinking he drinks every night of the week, and I'm 32 now, and I can't remember him not having a drink every single night. And it's not like one or two. He's, 8 to 10 pints a night, guaranteed. And he's an alcoholic, which I've explained. It took him for me to educate him that he's an alcoholic, and I had to, he would admit that, I depend on alcohol every day. Whereas my mum was in denial, because my mum would like, well, alcoholics are someone who has a bottle of vodka next to their bed. They wake up in the middle of the night, they neck it, then they're up in the morning, then they drink it before work, then they're doing this and doing that. There's different forms of alcoholism, but people don't understand that it's an illness. It's like how you react, or how you perform basically when you're drinking this stuff.
Yeah, and there's so many functional alcoholics. If you look in like the entertainment industry, there's loads that can keep their job, they can go to work, but they're still drinking either at work, and they can put the persona on. Look at Gaza. He was able to do amazing things while still drinking.
Yeah, and it's just obviously eventually it's caught up with him and his addiction side of things. But like my dad is a functional alcoholic. He don't miss a day of work in his life. He'll wake up at 6 a.m, bang on the button. He won't be late for anything. So he that's just the way he is. But he did mention, you're an athlete, you're drinking a lot and blah blah. But I just thought, well, I just felt indestructible. I felt I could do what I want when I wanted to, and no one could tell me any different. But I remember, at Birmingham, we always had that culture when we used to go away with Wales. We would always have a drink afterwards. When we were in different countries, we would, we were on a great form there. So we more often than not, we were winning games. So we'd go out, celebrate. We would, we'd obviously have security guards where we'd close down certain areas of bars or clubs or whatever it might have been. So we would have a free reign and access to do what we wanted. So, and then, with Birmingham, I'd go out in some nights and I'd be having a party. I was having like a shot of tequila with the chief executive, and things like that. And then everything's all right then because you're performing when you're winning. When I was losing, I was like saying, I obviously had the views back saying, "Cops, you're out a bit too much at the moment." I was thinking, I'm out less now than I was before. Yeah. But it was okay when we were winning because I was having a shot with the chief exec, blah blah blah. And then I remember there was only one time that I drank before a game. And I probably don't like to admit it, but I was at a Justin Bieber concert, and so I was there, and Troy Deeney has sent me a picture with him and Gary Rowett, and I was saying, "Oh, nah, you're having me on," because they're in a box behind me, blah blah. He said, "Oh, what are you drinking?" And I had like a pint of Stella or something because they only had Stella at this place. I never drink Stella, so I said, "Oh, it's apple juice. I fancy a large apple juice." And he said, "No, it's beer. The manager can see that's beer." So I thought, fuck it, I'm getting steaming now. I just carried on drinking. The next day we won 4-2. I set up 2 or scored 1 or something, and I thought, all right, I can get away with it again. And
would have been a different story though if you'd performed, like say you'd had a nightmare in that game. You'd have probably been straight in that office because they knew that you'd been out on the piss the night before. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like, from the outside at least, like hearing you and other footballers talk about it, it's almost like you say, if things are going all right and you're still doing your job, at that time clubs were happy to kind of turn a blind eye to it and the culture of it, and even if they deep down knew that you were going out too much, if you're performing for the club, you're turning up to training and you're not late for training and you're not causing any like rifts in the squad and this sort of thing,
do you think that
they'll kind of excuse it?
Do you think that sort of had a negative effect on you finding sort of abstinence and recovery because you could drink and then perform quite to a high level? It hadn't got to that stage where you would hit rock bottom, I suppose.
I think kind of, yeah, I had to personally hit my rock bottom to recover. Everyone's rock bottom is completely different. I always say that when people say, if they ask me for advice, if people are not, like my ex-wife and everyone were around me was like saying, you need to stop drinking. But until I wanted to stop drinking for myself, I wouldn't listen to a word they were saying. So you can tell any addict, you can tell anyone they need to do certain things, but unless they want to recover themselves or have their own self-care, it's not going to work. So I kind of, in the football industry, I wouldn't have spoken about my mental health. I wouldn't have spoken about my addiction during my playing career because I didn't want to jeopardize my contracts or me playing or whatever it might be. So coming towards the back end of my career, I wasn't enjoying it. I felt like football was getting in the way of my drinking, and it was kind of like it should have been the other way around. But my profession should have become first, and towards the back end of my career, it wasn't.
I
And when I
suppose
was feeling
sorry, David, what was that rock bottom? Like, what was it that then was that sort of, wow, okay, this has hit me now?
I think probably, I tried taking my life on 3 or 4 occasions, and I wouldn't necessarily think that was the defining moment for me to get help, because I was like, I'd say to my ex, like, oh, I get help tomorrow. I'm going to stop drinking. That would last about 24 hours before I had another, bottle of red wine in my hand. So that didn't really work. So I think probably when I started to feel these emotions and these feelings when I was sober, it was, I was going to car parks. I was thinking, right, I was Googling, how can I take my own life the best possible way, the quickest way. And so when those thoughts were creeping in when I was sober, and I remember when I went to America and I spoke to one of my friends, and I had like 2 or 3 drinks or whatever, and he was like, you change when you have a drink, don't you? And I was like, yeah, tell me what you think. And he told me, and I said to him, I said, look, I've been thinking this for a while, but I'm gonna check into rehab soon. I've had enough. I literally got back home and I checked into rehab. And then from that moment on, I didn't turn back. So I knew at that point when I was going to have my last drink. It was really weird and it was really bizarre that I thought, do you know what? This is the last time I'm going to drink. I need to change. And it's like a light bulb moment just switched on my body to think, right, sort your shit out and let's crack on. And from that point, I've not really turned back.
So I know, like, were you struggling with depression whilst drinking at that stage?
Yeah, I was literally, even I was spending a lot of days in bed. I was in I was in a pickle. I was in a dark moment for a long period of time. I think, with the self-medicating thing, I was suffering the first marriage, and I never dealt with those issues, and then materialized into a lot bigger issues, blah, 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 over those years. And I just didn't get to grips with it. And then I was just doing things that I'd never do before. And it just got a lot worse, all the time. And I was suffering obviously with mental health problems and my addiction. So it's not a great combination, let's be honest. So,
and there'll be people on here listening. I think there'll be people listening who have struggled with depression that will identify with some bits. But I think that in a good way, there'll probably be people listening that have never struggled with any mental health. And so how would you explain depression to those people, those fans that probably go to the game, think, fuck you, David Cotterill, go home, go, I've never struggled with mental health. It's fine. How do you explain it to them? What is depression, I suppose, for you?
I think depression for me was, I found it really, really difficult to get out of bed. It was always a chore to get out of bed. So I was hanging on to things that have happened in the past. I was putting myself down. I couldn't get out of the rut, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. My overthinking was then kicking in with obviously anxiety. I was creating scenarios that are not even real in my head. And then I was thinking I was in that moment, which made me depressed. And I just couldn't get out of it. Nothing worse is when I hear a quote was like, man up or fix up or do this. It annoys the shit out of me. But these people who have those views on that, I would say probably find some education surrounding mental health, because if you're not going through it, then I bet you everything under the sun that someone in your family is. So,
100%.
and I think that even if you're 55, 60 or whatever age you are, just because you don't have depression now or certain mental health problems, it doesn't mean that it won't happen in like a year, 2 years time. So I think education is the way forward. I think the education of starting them very young to know what mental health problems are, to know more about racism, to know more about these certain things in schools is where it needs to happen. I think, and if you've got a family member who are suffering, then you should know exactly what they're going through and speak about it, because they need to have that safe environment that they can trust someone, because they might look happy on the outside, but they're not, they might not be in the inside.
And we spoke to a lot of guests that, in particular with depression, the depressed states are the really difficult stages, and you get through that. But one thing that sort of lasts, if you get into recovery, or if you find that you're doing well with your depression is the sort of shame and guilt of, for you it could be those suicidal thoughts and attempts and stuff like that. How do you deal with those shame and guilt? As a dad now, thinking.
You mean do I have any shame or guilt of thinking about taking my own life?
Yeah, so a lot of people we speak to have been through similar stages. They'll say, at that stage it was horrendous. I've been through this really difficult stage, and they'll do things that they would never normally do. So it could be with gambling, it could be spending family's money, with drinking, it could be making difficult decisions. And it's then when they find recovery, they're left with the memories of what they might have done and put. I know you've spoken before about being in rehab for your child's first birthday. Is there moments like that? Do you find those sort of guilt feelings helpful in keeping you in recovery, or do you still have to work on those things?
Yeah, I have to work on my recovery every single day. I speak to people from, the fellowship there with AA, and so I speak to friends who are in the similar position as me they're on recovery for alcoholism, and so it's an everyday thing. You don't just like, oh right, I've not drunk for 19, 20 months or 7 years, whatever it might be. You don't just switch off then. It's an everyday. It's an everyday routine. I wouldn't say it's a struggle. It's more of a struggle some days than others. But I sometimes think to myself about when I miss my daughter's first birthday. It's kind of like, well, that's probably the best present, because would it be she doesn't have a dad, or does she have a dad who makes the sacrifices to be there for all her other birthdays? So I made sure that was the only birthday that I was going to miss. So I kind of tell myself that. From the point of view of wanting to take my own life, I personally don't look back. I don't really look back and think, oh, I'm embarrassed about taking my own life. I just look forward, because you can't change the past. You can only control what is now, and you can't control what's in the future, because all we have is now, basically. So I live literally day to day. Obviously, you must plan for the future, but what's the point of looking at the past, because you can't change it? So I don't really look at that and think, oh my God, I'm embarrassed about it, because it's done. I can't change it. And if I've hurt anyone, again, I can only control now what we can do going forward. Have I hurt people that won't speak to me again? Yes. And I can't change that. That's just the way it is. So now I must focus on myself to be the best person that I can, then to help other people.
And I suppose anyone that doesn't know 12-step stuff, when you're going through your 12-step recovery, they have things where you have to make your amends to people that you've hurt whilst you were drinking. So I suppose you went through that sort of stuff to process that stuff. And I think anyone that has no knowledge on 12-step, it's always a good thing, even if you've got no addiction problems, there's some amazing little things that you get in 12-step that will help you in just general life. And I think there's one thing that I wanted to ask, compared to, say, myself or Si, if we went into 12-step recovery, there's not the pressure on us to stay clean or stay sober is not ever going to be as much as the pressure on you, I suppose, because you're more in the football public eye. Do you feel that pressure from, if you were to relapse, that people might go, oh well, it didn't work for David Cotterill, so maybe it's not that good? Because you hear this, I know with the founder, there was a lot of pressure with him when he first went out talking about his recovery out in the public eye. Do you feel that pressure?
Not really. No, I don't really. No, I don't. I think it's like most things, really, isn't it? When you see things in the newspapers of kind of like you see a lot of negative stuff. So you hear the negative stories, but there's a lot of success stories as well. Who are very famous people who are doing really, really well, who's been clean. Like Eminem is like, I don't know, 11, 12 years clean and sober. So you don't really hear the success stories because negativity sells in the newspapers. That's just the way it is.
Sad.
Yeah. So from that point of view, I don't feel the pressure of that in the public domain. I think a lot of people are expecting me to fail. That's what makes me drive forward to think, well, fuck you, I'm not going to fail. So that's what kind of like, I use that as like a positive to me, because people expect me to fail. People have expected me to fail all my life. So it's not a new thing to me. People wanted me to fail during football and whatever it might be. It's quite funny. As soon as I retired, the amount of people, new people that want to speak to me then because I've retired, because I'm out of that profession, they think that they can come and talk to me then to maybe try and get one over on me is really bizarre.
Yeah.
It's like, as soon as I finished, everyone's like, well, oh my God, you are actually normal. I'm thinking, well, I've always been that way. You just didn't give me the time of day because you thought I was an arsehole because maybe
Yeah.
you were jealous or something. I don't know.
Yeah. That must be so strange as well. If you don't mind me asking, David, since that day where you said like you decided, right, I'm not going to drink again, have you had any kind of relapses since then?
No, from the time that I stopped, I didn't. When I used to say, oh yeah, I'm not going to drink again, blah, 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 I didn't really want it for me. I'd still fucking continue to drink. But from the time that so I'm now 19 months sober, from that time that I stopped drinking when I went into rehab, I've not touched a drink since.
Wicked. That's amazing, mate. And just to finish us off, obviously, not only have you've got yourself sober and you've been working on yourself, and one of the things, as we discussed on the football show, one of the things I love about your social media is you post like a lot of positivity and positive quotes. And like, I'm not afraid to say, like, I've had times, particularly like in the last couple of months, where I've been struggling and things like that. I'll see something, maybe it's a quote on your social media or someone else's, and it just gives you like a little, I wouldn't even say a lift, but it can give you a different outlook on how you're feeling. And I think sometimes that is so beneficial. So in your recovery, you stayed at was it the Sporting Chance Clinic? Is that the one that Tony Adams is involved with?
Yeah, that's the one that Tony Adams set up. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was obviously you came out of there, and then you've set up the David Cotterill Foundation. Tell us a bit about the reasons behind why you set it up, where the idea came from, and then obviously, what it's about and what it does.
Yeah, so when I started, because when I first spoke about my mental health, during my playing career, I did an interview with the BBC, and I really, really wasn't expecting it to blow up as much, but the guy, they contacted me about retiring and what was going on, and I was speaking to this guy very closely. He's known me from the Wales setup, and I trusted him to do the right article or the right interview on it. And when we go into the meeting, he was like, "Oh, I'm really nervous about today," and I was like thinking, "Why are you nervous?" Because what? And he never would say that, and I never thought that the story would be as big as it was, and it literally went all over the place about my mental health problems and blah blah blah. And the amount of messages that I had, right, of saying, I never knew you were going through that, or other people of saying, you're always happy and friendly when you're around me. It's kind of like, well, oh, okay, then, because I was happy and friendly, you didn't mean that. I was going home and I live with you, by the way, on a 24-hour basis. You know what I mean? It's kind of like weird. So, and it was really weird, because I kind of feel that with footballers, they get tarnished with a certain brush. It's kind of like, well, if a footballer's got depression, it's kind of like, oh, man up, he's this, he's that, he's got all this money.
Millions of pounds, he's
got millions of pounds.
Yeah, so why is he depressed?
Yeah, when Robin Williams was suffering with his mental health problems, oh my God, how sad is that, what he was going through? So and I'm not saying it's not sad, because I love Robin Williams, but that just goes to show the difference of opinions on like footballers to then an actor, whereas an actor's he would have had more money than probably 80-90% of footballers.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's the way it is. So when I did start speaking about my mental health, that's when I thought, right, well, a guy that I know locally in Cardiff, he said, maybe we should, set up something. I'm passionate about this. I've not dealt with mental health problems, but people in my family have, and he's always been about helping the community. So I thought, yeah, it's a good idea. I've always wanted to do something like that. How can we help people? So my main focus was not just helping professional athletes. It was about helping people who don't have money to go to counsellors, don't have a safe environment to go anywhere. So I come up with the idea of having like a coffee shop where we can go talk and listen and share our experience, kind of like the AA formula, but a lot more relaxed. It's not kind of like, you're allowed to have an open discussion and we'd have people there to give feedback of maybe little tips of what they can do and so on. So we had these coffee shops. We then had PT sessions of twice a week to kind of like create that healthy body, healthy mind. So that's kind of like the formula that we went down with our foundation.
That's amazing, mate. And I every now and again I'll pop on the website and have a look at the different stuff, because you do some, is it like online sort of self-help, and I think you said before you do some courses as well.
Yeah, so I've got another business to the side of, well, my foundation is obviously to help people more locally, and we do, with the meetings, we've only got one set up in Cardiff at the moment. Just before lockdown, we were thinking about setting up a lot more, but everyone's been in lockdown, so we can't move forward like most things in the world right now. So, so I've got a business with a psychotherapist. We designed self-help courses. So instead of going to see a counselor, it's kind of like you can go on your phone or your laptop at home where you can have your own self-help, which get down to the bottom where your trauma is coming from as when you were a child. It's got inner child stuff. It's got things about depression, anxiety. You've got mindfulness on there. It's got goal setting. So it's got literally everything. And we have things for children as well. So we have like work booklets that are going. We've recently put them into schools. They're very, very cheap for what we do, and it's not really necessarily about the money for us. We're trying to help as many people as possible. So, we help schools with that. We've got teenage courses on there as well. So we have loads and loads of various things that we're looking to do, and that's separate from my foundation. That's called the Crystal Matrix, which it's all on my bio on Instagram, etc.
Excellent, that's amazing, mate. Look, David, thanks so much for just talking to us about the issues you've had with everything, and I wish you nothing but the best. I know it's not always easy, but I commend you not only for winning your own battle with alcohol, as I know personally just how difficult that is, but also going on from there and trying to help other people. I think that's really something to be proud of and commendable. It's incredible to see. Jacob, thank you for joining me, mate, as well.
No, thanks for having me. I loved it.
And lastly, I'd just like to say this. If people watching or listening, if you or a family member is battling addiction or struggling with any mental health issues, just know that you're not alone, and we're all in it together, and you can get through it. As a good friend of mine says to me pretty regular, keep on keeping on. I will drop links to all our social media, the David Cotterill Foundation, as well as Mind's mental health charity, in the description for the episode. We'll be back next Sunday for another episode of A.C.E Podcast Nation's Mental Health in Sport. And spread the word. Remember to be kind, help each other. # don't be a dick. And until then, I appreciate your time, gentlemen, and we'll see you all next week.